Well, the time is finally here.
I'm vengeance.
For the first time since The Dark Knight Rises came out just about a decade ago, a new standalone Batman film has dropped in the theaters. And I was so excited for this that I actually went to see it 2 times in the first 2 days it came out. The Batman was easily my most anticipated movie of 2022, and to be honest, it's probably the most anticipated movie for me in the last 5+ years. I couldn't remember the last time I was this hyped for a movie. And this thing has been in developmental hell so long that the original plan was to get Ben Affleck to do a standalone Batman film, which I still wouldn't mind seeing, but doesn't look like that's gonna happen. So after a ton of delays and years passing, what we got instead was The Batman with Robert Pattinson. I can't wait to talk about this. And I know I generally like to save my overall impression of a movie until the end of the review, but if there's any of you watching that consider yourselves, dare I say, a bit of a detective, there is a context clue somewhere in my video that probably gives a good idea on what I thought of this movie. Somewhere.
You think the answer to my riddle is buh.
I heard Rachel say.
Don't worry about what she says. Worry she.
Helicopter.
And just as a quick disclaimer, I'm not feeling 100% right now, so at any point in the review, if I sound like this,
of Spider-Man.
well, I apologize in advance. But I was just too excited, I couldn't wait any longer to get this out. So The Batman isn't a true origin story. It actually takes place 2 years into Bruce Wayne's venture as the Dark Knight, when a new criminal comes to Gotham City named the Riddler. No, not that one.
Police! Hands up!
There we go. And I'll be honest, I don't normally like to go into movies with high expectations because then I feel like sometimes I'm maybe a little overcritical, but in this case, I just couldn't help myself. I had sky-high expectations going into this. First of all, Matt Reaves is just a really talented visual storyteller and a great director. Most notably, the last 2 Planet of the Apes films and Cloverfield. It features a loaded cast, including Robert Pattinson, Paul Dano, Colin Farrell, and Zoe Kravitz, just to name a few. And based on the trailers, this appeared to be a very dark, grounded, gritty rendition of Gotham City and just Batman in general. In other words, it looked like exactly the movie that I've been waiting for. So did it meet and exceed my expectations, or did it leave me disappointed? I mean, come on. All right, now the first thing I have to get out of the way, this film is not gonna be for everybody, and I understand that. It's not a fast-paced, mile-a-minute thrill ride the entire way through. There are intense moments, there are some fights, there is a really badass car chase, but Reeves made a creative choice to slow this movie down and really let each scene breathe. It is very deliberately paced that way. So if you're not so much into the investigative side and piecing together clues, and you're somebody who would rather have your Batman constantly in these action sequences, this might not be the Batman for you. Reeves just does such a fantastic job of blending all these elements together and making it into one cohesive story. Like, this truly does feel like a blend of a horror movie, a psychological thriller, a murder mystery, a dark detective noir, and even a buddy cop film all rolled in one that just happens to take place in Gotham City with Batman kicking some serious ass along the way. This film gets so many things right, and I want to start with a big one. Batman actually does some detective work in this movie, and I mean like a lot of detective work. It seems so obvious for somebody with the nickname the world's greatest detective, right?
Sometimes words have different meanings, like the word bat could be an animal or a baseball bat.
I'm a bat.
Yet while there are elements of this in the other movies in the franchise, none of them chose to focus on this, and I'm not really sure why that is. This is a version of Batman that I've been waiting for so long, and holy shit did it deliver on that front.
You came. I've been trying to reach you.
Riddler's latest. It's all about the Waynes.
The story here primarily focuses on the Riddler killing these important political figures throughout Gotham City and leaving these clues behind for Batman and Jim Gordon to find. It also deals with Bruce learning the truth about his father Thomas and the role he may have played in the corrupt nature of Gotham City. And in my opinion, the storytelling is one of the highlights of the movie. It is masterful. With so much going on during this runtime, we keep getting these different layers like peeled back, like what the Riddler's true motives are, where the Wayne family fits into what he's doing, and where the Batman fits in. The Riddler is terrifying in this movie, and he absolutely tortures some of these people. I feel like this movie really played with that line of PG-13 and R. I feel like they put their toes right on there, and they got away with everything they could without making this movie a full R rating. Like, there are moments when this truly feels like a horror movie, and you know I love that. My closest comparison would be like a mix of Seven, Zodiac, and some of the things he does to these victims. I would say he also gave me some Jigsaw vibes. Apparently, some people thought his performance was a little too over the top in the third act, but personally, I think Paul Dano knocked it out of the park with this role. He is used very sparingly throughout, which I actually thought was a great choice, because every time you see him, it adds to the tension and it just leaves you wanting more. Personally, if I see more from him in the inevitable sequel, he's gonna move up my list of live-action Batman villains real fast. Because we all know physically, you're probably not gonna beat Batman. But this man tests his mental strength and fortitude, and for me, that makes for a much more compelling story. But beyond Paul Dano, this entire film is just perfectly cast. So let's talk about what we all came here for. Robert Pattinson is amazing as Batman. In my opinion, he has now become the definitive version of the Caped Crusader. Like, this man was born for this role. And I say Batman because that's who we get for about 90% of the movie. Bruce Wayne has like maybe 3 or 4 scenes throughout, so it definitely lives up to its title. And this movie just opens so strong. It really set the tone for the entire film and what we should expect. Some of my favorite moments were from the intro, where we have Robert Pattinson leading us in with his narration, and then when they show that bat signal, holy shit.
Fear is a tool. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning.
This is the first time that I feel like these thugs were truly scared of this man. Like, sure, in other movies, they saw the bat signal and they were maybe scared to get their ass beat by him. But no, in this movie, these guys are terrified. Like, the way Batman's presented at the beginning, he's almost as horrifying as the Riddler himself. And then when these guys just keep looking in the shadows and that score hits, and then we hear Batman's footsteps and he finally does appear out of one of the shadows, so badass. Bruce is just a genuinely damaged human in this. You feel his pain and you feel his rage, because when he fights these guys, he certainly doesn't pull any punches. He's brutal. And when he's fighting them, I also got a feeling where almost he doesn't even care if he lives or dies. Like, he just eats these bullets and walks face first towards these guys. This guy honestly gives 0 fucks. The movie definitely gave me the vibe that when he's Batman, that's when he's truly most comfortable. It's almost like Bruce Wayne is his mask and he hates wearing it. Another choice that I loved about this movie is how, as great as all these supporting characters were, I love how they were used so sparingly. So this truly feels like a movie about Batman. In all of the other films, it feels like the villains take a large portion of the spotlight, and it almost feels like Batman becomes a side character or like a secondary character in his own movie. But that's definitely not the case here. Also, Batman doesn't talk a bunch in this movie, and the way that Robert Pattinson is able to emote with his face is unreal. You know exactly what this guy is going through just by looking at those dead eyes and that facial expression. In fact, one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie is pretty early on, when Bruce is staring at this boy who just lost his father, and they just make eye contact and they hold it for a really long time because you can see that pain in Bruce's face. Obviously, he knows what this kid is going through, and it's almost like he's in this trance until Jim Gordon like snaps him out of it. And then let me just get this out of the way because this is by far the dumbest criticism about this movie. If there's people out there still refusing to watch it or saying his Batman sucked because they don't want a glittery Batman, Twilight was over a decade ago. Let it go. You should do yourselves a favor and watch some of his movies, I don't know, in the last 15 years, because this dude can act. Don't write this guy off just because he was in Twilight. If you genuinely didn't like his Batman, please let me know in the comments why. I'm not gonna argue with you. I genuinely want to hear some different opinions, because personally, I loved him. And I hope he makes 2, 3, 4 more movies, because I'm sold. This is already my favorite version of Batman, and to be honest, it's not particularly close. And then next up, speaking of Gordon, Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon was in this movie a lot more than I anticipated, and he is just like the perfect complement to Batman. He's the only guy from the entire Gotham City Police Department that trusts him, and he puts his own reputation on the line multiple times throughout the movie because he trusts the Bat. And also, he knows that Batman can go places that law enforcement can't touch. Their chemistry really showed through the runtime of the film. And this is where that buddy cop dynamic that I mentioned earlier, this is where it comes into effect. Most of the detective work in the movie is done by these two working together, and we even get a few laughs during their exchanges. And just as I mentioned earlier with Paul Dano moving up my list of villains, I'm not ready to say that Jeffrey Wright is better than Gary Oldman's version of Gordon yet, but again, let's give him another movie, and I'm certainly ready to have that conversation. Zoe Kravitz as Selena Kyle is fantastic, and I would say that her story is just as compelling as Bruce's in the movie. And she has this perfect balance of helping Batman, but at the same time, her own interests are at the top of her priority list. It's almost this mutual understanding of, sure, I'll help you, but I don't mind fucking you over if it benefits me. Exactly the way Catwoman should be. It never feels like they're truly allies, they just happen to be hunting down the same people. Their chemistry and brief moments of romance definitely feel genuine, not forced whatsoever, and she's another damaged human that's dealing with the murder of her mother at a very young age. So it makes sense that she can relate to the Batman without even knowing it. And finally, as far as casting goes, I can't move past this portion without at least mentioning Colin Farrell as the Penguin, or Oz.
I got you! I got you!
Now, the Penguin was a villain that I never really cared for much, be it the animated series, the Arkham games, or Batman Returns. As much as I love Danny DeVito, it was a little too Tim Burton, if you know what I mean.
Somebody's gotta get stabbed! Somebody's gotta get stabbed!
To me, he just never felt like he really belonged with the likes of the Joker, the Riddler, or Two-Face. But I absolutely loved this take on his character. Like, if you didn't read the casting list, you would have no idea that this was Colin Farrell. His performance is truly transformative. The visual effects and the makeup look great, and he just really goes all into this character. He becomes the Penguin. He stole almost every scene that he was in, and while this movie isn't loaded with humor, which by the way is a decision that I'm a big fan of, a majority of the funny lines in the entire movie came from him. And I know HBO Max has already announced a standalone Penguin show, which unlike those MCU shows that I really don't care about, this is one that I'll definitely be watching. But even though he has that show, with certain events transpiring in the second half of the movie, he now has the means and resources to make life really tough for Batman going forward. And I would be on board 100% if a large portion of the second movie is based around that premise. But beyond casting and storyline, to me this is easily Matt Reaves' best directed film. The way he uses transitions and frames his shot, it's just a thing of beauty to witness. He says so much with his shots. A lot of times, dialogue just isn't necessary. I know I already talked about it, but when the thugs are just looking down the dark alleys, waiting for Batman to appear, and just that score hitting in the background, it's so damn good. The set design is also amazing. The movie was shot between London, Liverpool, and Glasgow. And to me, this feels the most like Gotham City since the Tim Burton movies. As much as I adore the Christopher Nolan trilogy, one of my criticisms was it never truly felt like Gotham City. I don't know if it was the change of locations or because a majority of the scenes in The Batman were shot at night, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like Gotham City was just Chicago or Pittsburgh. I felt like it was its own place. And then speaking of the score, this score from Michael Giacchino was just top notch. The Batman, Riddler, and Catwoman all had their own themes, and I enjoyed all three of them. And this is one real small nitpick, but I do think the Batman's theme was maybe a little overplayed. I feel like there was a few scenes that didn't really necessitate it. But again, like I said, that's a very small nitpick. I have to find something to complain about this movie, right? On top of the score, I was a fan of the musical choices. Of course, Something in the Way by Nirvana. If you go read the lyrics to that, I think that was a pretty good choice for what Bruce is going through in his journey. And just the sound design in general was next level. Like when I was introduced to the Batmobile and you heard him fire up that engine and literally like the seats in the theater were shaking, that gave me goosebumps. This is a movie that you are truly doing yourself a disservice if you don't see it in theaters. And then something I wanted to address real quick. Another complaint I hear besides glittery Batman, which is so stupid. Some people think Paul Dano's performance in the third act was over the top. Now that was something I kind of agreed with the first time I saw this movie, but then after rewatching it and really paying attention, and realizing that the Riddler thought him and Batman were on the same side this whole time, he thought they were working together, I think for the fact that he's insane, the reaction was totally warranted. So it did take me a second watch through, but I have actually rescinded that complaint. A lot of people said that they didn't like the third act of the film and that the movie could have stopped before that and felt better, like after they caught the Riddler. But to me, that makes no sense. Like, this entire movie is about this build-up to the Riddler's plan. Why would you make this entire movie and then cut it off before you see his plan in action? And then the only other one I hear is that the movie felt too long. Now, first of all, The Dark Knight Rises was actually only 11 minutes shorter than this film, and I was engaged the whole time, so for me the 3 hours flew by. But again, if that is one of your complaints, I can't fault you for it. I do think they could have cut the movie about 2 scenes shorter than they did, which I'll talk about in a second. So there was nothing that I actually hated about this movie. So very briefly, I'll just go into a few of the nitpicks that I had. I already mentioned, I think Batman's theme is just a little overplayed. Not every scene that it was in needed it, but I still love the theme. Now my next criticism, a lot of people aren't going to agree with this, and I understand that. But for me personally, I didn't need the whole Joker scene at Arkham. I fully understand, like, this is what every hero movie does now, is give us a little tease for the next one. But this isn't like every other hero film. That is just something I personally would have rather not seen, and I feel like it just didn't fit the tone of this film. I feel like a more fitting bookend would have been the scene where he's helping people on the rooftop. Like, you had this movie lead in with his narration. How fitting would it have been to have it go out the same exact way? And that shot of him from the helicopter, I feel like a fade to black there would have been just perfect. And then lastly, I just didn't love Bruce Wayne in the movie. There was just no distinguishing features between Bruce and the Bat. Now, I do think that was fully intentional by Matt Reaves, because Pattinson even said in interviews that this early into being Batman, he's still trying to find that line where Bruce ends and Batman begins, or vice versa. So I get it, and I think by the end of the movie, he got it too. So I'm hoping in the sequel, we're gonna see just a little bit more personality from Bruce Wayne. But the truth is, and you've probably already gathered this from my review, I absolutely loved this movie. Between the characters, the acting, the directing, the story, the dialogue, the set designs, the sound design, the score, the blending of the different tones, and a heavier focus on Batman being a detective, this is a masterpiece. In a time where there's 3 to 4 MCU movies every year that all just kind of feel like the same thing, and they're just baiting you on to watch the next movie, this is art. Like I said, it's not gonna be for everybody. this movie was made for a very specific audience. And apparently, I'm that audience. To me, this is a damn near perfect movie. I'm gonna give The Batman a 9.5 out of 10. But that's gonna do it for my review of The Batman. Please let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments. I am so eager to hear your thoughts, I think more than any other movie I've ever reviewed. Because based on the reviews, this seems to be very mixed. There are people in my camp that absolutely adore this version and this is our Batman. And there are some people that just say it's a 3-hour boring detective movie, which to me makes no sense, but hey, I want to hear your honest opinions. Also, while I have you, me and a couple friends have a pop culture podcast where we actually just discussed all the Batman movies leading up to The Batman, which you can find in the description below. And as always, if you enjoyed this, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing right over here so you don't miss my next video ranking all the live-action Batman movies. And until that ranking video, we'll see you in the next one.